Welcome to a new episode of New Worker Radio, presented by the Communist Workers Platform. New Worker Radio brings you national and international updates from a worker's perspective. More news, local stories, and updates like this are published regularly in our national newspaper and online at newworker.us. You can support New Worker and the CWP on Patreon, patreon.com/newworker. We open this episode with national news to discuss the recent electoral success of the DSA in Democratic Party primaries, with a focus on how both the right and left sides of the capitalist political spectrum in the U.S. obscures the struggle for socialism. In local stories, we will turn to Whiting, Indiana, where over 800 workers at British Petroleum's largest inland refinery have been locked out as BP wages a war on United Steelworkers, taking a direct aim at the organized power of labor. In international news, we then turn to Venezuela, which recently experienced a devastating earthquake, leading to the loss of over 4,000 lives and a breakdown of rescue efforts under the social democratic leadership of Delcy Rodriguez. Lastly, we will provide a short update in the ongoing inter-imperialist war with Iran and Ukraine, with additional context on the Trump administration's activation of the auto industry for war economy production. In national news, in the recent weeks, the Democratic Socialists of America has claimed a handful of electoral victories. In New York's 7th and 13th districts covering Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx, candidates Claire Valdez and Daria Liza Avila Chevalier defeated the Democratic Party Old Guard in the primaries. In Colorado's 1st district, Malak Quiros unseated 15-term incumbent Democrat Deanna DeJette. These candidates have run on common platforms of Medicare for All, Abolish ICE, Ending War, Housing for All, and Unions for All. As prices for rent, food, gas, insurance, and more continue to climb while our wages stay low and jobs are few and far in between, the workers of this country look for a way out. Daily stress from bills, debt, and harsh workplaces wears us workers down. Our families are more and more burdened by this week-to-week, day-to-day struggle. Meanwhile, the capitalist class is throwing a parade. The stock market reaches atmospheric heights, Elon Musk becomes the world's first trillionaire, and billions of our dollars are sent to fight wars against competing states. And impossible sums of money are poured into the AI technology that the capitalists will use to surveil and displace us to their exclusive benefit. Our situation is worsening. In the desperate grasp for a way out of this reality, the ruling class has developed two opposing and equally pernicious political options, both married to keeping capitalism alive and well. On the one hand, we have the MAGA movement spearheaded by Trump. MAGA Reaction seeks a forceful imposition of labor discipline, of division amongst the working class itself to better exploit us, and a more aggressive confrontation against the USA's capitalist rivals in China, Russia, Iran, and others. MAGA emerged as a force resisting a trend of relative U.S. political, economic, and military decline on the world stage. MAGA kicks and screams, deploying repressive measures against the workers and people of this country and the world in their futile attempt to maintain the U.S. as the unchallenged great imperialist power. Their attempts to discipline labor with ICE raids and to beat back competitors such as Iran have worsened the situation for us workers. More boss terror, higher prices. This is the MAGA agenda. On the other hand, we have the progressive movement, led by a number of different forces, notably DSA allies and members Bernie Sanders, AOC, Zoran Mamdani, Hassan Piker, and more. As in previous times in the history of capitalism, a social force seeking to put lipstick on the capitalist pig through reforms gains momentum. DSA's June victories with Valdez, Chevalier, and Quiros are the latest victory for this progressive trend that steals the name of socialism and claims to be the voice of the working class. It must be highlighted that each and every one of the named victorious candidates ran not as members of the Democratic Socialists of America, but as members of the Democratic Party, the very same political party that supported the invasion of Iraq, the Wall Street bailouts, and the genocide of Gaza. In short, those that support the exploitation and oppression of workers and people all around the world. The DSA's strategy is to develop a, quote, left wing of the Democratic Party to transfigure the Democrats into a party that, per Mamdani, can win nationally by a focus on working people. This strategy fails to recognize the fundamental clash between workers and capitalists. Capitalists can only exist by having a class of people, the working class, who they may exploit for their labor power to generate all of their profits. No labor to exploit, no profit. No profit, no capitalist. The government serves the needs of the capitalists by keeping the entire exploitative system in place with its legal, educational, cultural, and political arms. There can be no changing or reforming of such a government built to exploit all workers, just as one cannot use a Toyota Corolla as a cargo ship. DSA, in making its strategy to mutate the Democratic Party into a workers' party, diverts the upswell of popular energy against this system towards a cliff dive. DSA's unofficial mouthpiece, Jacobin Magazine, celebrated the electoral wins as securing, quote, strong partners in government. This is the grand horizon of the progressive trend exposed in its own words. Not the abolition of the capitalist state, but a, quote, friendlier seat within it. DSA states that workers, choosing which bills to fall behind on this month, should be glad that their exploiters can look forward to a fresh round of, quote, strong partners. Under the leadership of Trump, the MAGA movement has from the outset labeled these DSA social democrats, Mamdani, and other progressives as, quote, communists. Facing record low approval ratings and the threat of losing control over the legislative branch of the federal government, Trump employs an age-old tactic of red baiting and whipping up false categorization of the threat of communism. In this way, both sides obscure the actual definition of socialism-communism as a system free from exploitation, defined not by endless profit-seeking, but by meeting the needs of all workers and people through the establishment of a worker state and the construction of a new political economic system. To be clear, both MAGA and progressivism sow their illusions in the consciousness of workers and people of the U.S. Both use each other as a political commodity to ensure victory and channel popular indignation into methods of managing the capitalist system to avert crises. Objectively, both delay a challenge to the power of the bourgeois state itself, keeping the workers subjugated even longer. In essence, both social forces prop up capitalism, while the class struggle is contained and channeled into system compliance. In response to both, the CWP USA asserts that both MAGA reaction and progressive reform are dead ends for the working class. Both will be swept away by the organized working class in its historical and inevitable quest for the revolutionary overthrow of capitalism, the very system that's exploiting us all, which is wholeheartedly represented by both reaction and reform. In local news, over 800 operators at BP's largest inland refinery located in Whiting, Indiana, have been locked out since March, when contract negotiations hit a tipping point. The workers of United Steelworkers Local 7-1 overwhelmingly rejected the initial contract offer, which would defang the union on several fronts, destroying their ability to strike, forcing workers into non-union salary roles, subjecting workers to more AI surveillance, and expanding processes for terminations. This is an attack on the union, and an attack on the working class generally. Workers on the picket have said that BP is seeking to undo 90 years of gains and to ultimately break the union by cutting upwards of 100 union operator jobs, by converting them to salaried roles, contracting out or eliminating whole segments of the workforce, including maintenance and environmental departments, and implementing productivity measures such as increased surveillance, the use of AI data tools, and merit systems to justify termination. Not only is the company assaulting the union's strength, they are also attempting to cheapen workers' labor power at a time when inflation is on the rise. The company claims they are offering 13% raises and 3% guaranteed bonuses to the workers. What they keep hidden is the fact that these raises come with a decreased baseline pay, which will cut workers' pay to less than what they made previously. Many of the company's proposals and tactics were recently employed by Chris Delafranco, BP's Whiting Refinery Vice President, who was involved in negotiations between ExxonMobil and USW during a 2021 lockout that resulted in the weakening of refinery workers in Beaumont, Texas. Since the start of the U.S.-Israeli imperialist war with Iran, oil companies like BP have doubled their profits. BP's first quarter earnings topped $3.2 billion, yet the workers are expected to abandon their demands for better pay at a time when their wages are stretched thin by soaring gas prices charged by BP, food, and housing. If the BP operators were paid the full value of their labor, there would be nothing left for Chris Delafranco, for CEO Meg O'Neill's $5 million bonus, and other multimillionaire parasitic BP executives. The Whiting plant processes oil 24 hours a day, directly supplies fuel to critical infrastructure in Chicago, and ships gas to 7 states. This plant is essential to keeping the economy running on oil, and it cannot function without the BP workers. The workers at the BP refinery put their lives on the line for 12 or more hours a day, sometimes 7 days a week, missing holidays with their families and wearing their bodies down to keep everything running. As one worker put it, quote, "They break you down day by day." Their daily sacrifice holds significant power, their own labor being a key linchpin to the entire U.S. capitalist economy. By demanding contract terms laden with anti-strike provisions and mechanisms to enforce mass layoffs, it is clear that the BP bosses intend to weaken the position of organized labor, squeeze more productivity from workers, pay workers significantly less, and prevent any such challenge to their profit extraction. Further, the operators and the surrounding Whiting community are concerned that the scabs BP hired are not qualified to do the work safely. Due to the hazardous nature of oil refining, untrained scabs pose a significant safety threat to the workers on site, to the surrounding community, and to all those who use Lake Michigan, where the refinery sits. Since the beginning of the lockout, the Whiting refinery has experienced several flaring incidents. This is the burning off of excess pressure, one of which is being investigated by the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. Workers suspect that BP has kept a lid on other incidents to hide the danger of their use of scab labor. The BP workers' situation is fragile. While a strike fund exists, coverage is insufficient for the needs of many on strike. Coverage is on a needs basis, for utilities and rent only, not even for groceries. Some workers have no choice but to look for second jobs to cover their basic needs, only to struggle to be hired elsewhere as soon as they mention they are BP workers. Working mothers with children to care for are forced to use coupons and sacrifice their own needs to make sure their children are fed during the summer, being unable to afford bringing their children to summer camps or do recreational activities. During summer, workers' children are confined to their homes, exacerbating the economic burden on working parents, especially mothers. These refineries don't run themselves. Without the hundreds of workers who are currently at wit's end, the facility would not run. Quote, "We already run this place without them," said one worker. BP has locked out workers to starve them into giving in. They will put families in the street and children on food stamps before they concede to the workers' demands. Workers can only win such a war if we fight and if we take on the offensive. If the workers' unity were to break, it would not be the CEOs who lose a penny, but the workers who would lose pay, benefits, protections, and kneecap their ability to fight back and build power. If you would like to show support for the striking workers, you can donate to their strike fund here, supportoilworkers.com. In the wake of 2 strong earthquakes that hit the north and central parts of Venezuela, the country is now faced with a deepening humanitarian crisis, with the people unprotected against the consequences of the disaster, and the bourgeois state proving unable to provide the support needed for the thousands of earthquake victims. According to the latest figures, there are at least 4,700 reported dead, with over 16,000 people reported injured. About 15,000 citizens have lost their home, with thousands more missing. Search and rescue operations continue amid hundreds of aftershocks, while authorities have not given a full picture of the final number of missing persons. This disaster hit a country already weakened by years of social democratic mismanagement, economic crises, and harsh economic sanctions from the U.S. Many buildings, especially social housing, collapsed easily due to their poor construction quality, which has intensified the criticism of authorities. Survivors and volunteers report long delays in the arrival of food, medical supplies, and heavy machinery. In many areas, the first rescue efforts were organized by civilians, and there are reports of aid thefts by members of security forces. Delcy Rodriguez, the interim president, defended the government's actions, stating that the emergency response was activated immediately and thousands of state officials were deployed. This crisis has also taken on a political dimension, with the challenge to Rodriguez escalating as her term as acting president ended on July 3rd. International aid is gradually arriving. The U.S., taking advantage of the situation, is strengthening its presence in the country, having deployed thousands of military personnel. International organizations pledged to contribute to the reconstruction of Venezuela, with the government planning a $200 million recovery fund, but estimates of total financial impact lay at over $10 billion. A critical warning was issued by the Venezuelan Communist Party about the intentions of the U.S. to use this tragedy to escalate its desire to control Venezuela by deploying a heavier military presence within the territory under the guise of humanitarian aid. Notably, there are now over 2,000 military personnel within the country, while U.S. Command Southcom has sent more warships, helicopters, and other equipment. There has been a constant presence in the Caribbean since the military intervention last January, which resulted in the kidnapping of President Maduro, the placement of Delcy Rodriguez, and the establishment of cordial cooperation with U.S. imperialism. Lastly, the situation in the Middle East is becoming more and more dangerous with the escalation of the imperialist war in Iran. The U.S. continues to level threats against Iran, while both continue bombings of critical infrastructure. The U.S. seeks more control over the strategically important Straits of Hormuz in the fierce competition between the monopolies of the U.S. and China, its biggest competitor. Meanwhile, the pro-Iranian Ansar Allah movement threatened to close off the straits between the Arabian Peninsula and the Horn of Africa after Saudi Arabia launched strikes within Yemen. Iranian leadership warns that it is ready to stop all energy exports from the Middle East due to the new naval blockade imposed by the U.S. on Iran this week. This announcement was made after President Donald Trump threatened to bomb another nuclear facility within Iran if they did not return to negotiations. In the last few days, Iran has struck U.S. infrastructure within the region and merchant ships, while the U.S. carried out a 7-hour barrage. At least 35 people were killed because of American attacks, and at least another 300 were injured. Meanwhile, in Europe, attacks on both sides of the US, NATO, EU, and Russian imperialist conflict in Ukraine are escalating every day, with strikes on critical infrastructure, including oil tankers. The Ukrainians announced that they had hit 2 Russian oil refineries and launched drones against Russian oil tankers in the Black Sea, with 20 tankers reportedly being struck. These military escalations are being fueled by some serious money for the war industry. Ukraine has secured over 6 billion euros in EU loans in order to buy unmanned aircraft parts from China, according to the Financial Times. This loan is the first of wider EU support for Ukraine, under which 60 billion euros is earmarked for war supplies. With this move, Ukraine's use of EU funding for China's weaponry thus reveals Europe's dependence on Beijing for critical components in the competition to strengthen its own war industry. An investigation of the European Council of Foreign Relations warns that a huge stockpile of weapons and military contracts that have been tested in the war in Ukraine is likely to end up on the African continent. The Council researchers wrote in an article on June 15th, quote, "Judging by history, African countries will absorb a significant amount of this war surplus, significantly increasing the risk and intensity of conflicts on the continent." With the broadening imperialist conflict as a backdrop, we turn to the U.S. economy, where a shift in production hints at a long-term escalation. The U.S. government wants to use the capacity of domestic industries to increase the production of weapons and ammunition. President Donald Trump has singled out car manufacturers such as Ford and General Motors as possible actors in the work to build up the production of, among other things, Patriot and Tomahawk weapon systems. This shows how quickly capitalism can reset production when the war machine demands it. When the working class requires housing, healthcare, or public transportation, it is often said that these resources are lacking, that changes take time, and that the market must be allowed to rule. But when the state, capital, and the military industry need more robots, missiles, and anti-aircraft systems, entire industrial supply chains can be mobilized. The automotive industry has historically played a central role in war production, such as during World War II. This is not a neutral industrial transition. It is a militarization of the productive forces. The social workforce, technology, and productive capacity are not directed towards the needs of the working class, but at the further armament of imperialism. Instead of building buses, trains, housing, medical equipment, or other civilian infrastructure, the production of military equipment is prepared over all else. Capital does not oppose this. On the contrary, military contracts often open up new revenue flows for companies, especially those who are struggling in the economy. The defense industry and civilian monopolies often grow together as the state guarantees orders, financing, and technical support. This is the industrial base of modern imperialism: public money, private profits, and workers producing the tools for war. For the working class, this poses several threats. Workers in the automotive industry can often be drawn into war production, and community resources are directed from social needs to military ones, and the entire economy is accustomed to this permanent rearmament. When war production slows, there is often a drastic tightening of production. which can lead to severe economic crises. It can be said that war production is often used to delay economic crises and to address the severe lack of jobs in the market. But we know as communists that these crises are inherent to capitalism, no matter what tricks it keeps using to stay afloat. Additionally, quote, national security is often used to silence criticism and demand loyalty with the state's military line. The real alternative here is for all of our productive capacity to be placed under our control for the peaceful planning of our needs. The working class has no interest in its productive forces being used for Tomahawk missiles. It has an interest in housing, in food security, energy, and technology that serves humanity's needs. The US's attempt to involve the car industry in arms production therefore shows capitalism's logic of war in practice. When imperialism needs weapons, the whole society is changed to make it so. The response of the working class must be anti-militaristic, anti-imperialist, and class-independent. We say no to workers and factories being made into cogs in the war machine. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so that you can get notifications when our next episode is published. If you're outraged over high costs of living, soaring rents, and the stress of navigating day-to-day life, consider the CWP USA to fight for a real change. To learn more and sign up, go to cwpusa.org.